Harmony, Arkansas, 1962. The name itself was an aspiration, a promise whispered on the hot, humid breeze that swept through the cotton fields surrounding the small town. But Harmony, like the perfectly white blooms that stained the landscape, often masked the thorny realities beneath. In the sweltering heat of a segregated South, the colored entrance signs weren't just paint on wood. They were a brand, a constant reminder of a hierarchy etched into the very soul of the community. This history, these stories, these accounts, were the air that young Mei Lee breathed. Mei Lee worked at the Five and Dime, a dusty emporium overflowing with everything from penny candy to gingham fabric. For Mei Lee, it wasn't just a job, it was a window onto a world she yearned to understand. She dreamed of escaping the cotton fields, of attending Howard University, of becoming a lawyer and dismantling the very structures that held her community captive. Each customer she served, each coin she carefully counted, was a step towards that future. Her grandmother's stories of resilience during the Jim Crow era fueled her ambitions. The Five and Dime was owned by Mr. Abernathy, a man whose weathered face held the map of a life spent navigating the complexities of the South. He wasn't a firebrand, not a revolutionary, but he possessed a quiet decency, a sense of fair play that was rare in Harmony. He treated Mei Lee with respect, paid her a fair wage and even encouraged her studies. Their relationship, while unconventional in the context of the time, offered a glimmer of hope, a suggestion that change, however slow, was possible. One sweltering afternoon, a gleaming Cadillac, an ostentatious symbol of wealth and power, pulled up outside the Five and Dime. From it emerged Mr. Clarence Hamilton, a man whose family had owned the cotton mill for generations. Mr. Hamilton, with his starched linen suit and condescending gaze, was the embodiment of the Old South, a world where power resided in the hands of a select few. He strode into the store, his presence immediately silencing the murmur of conversation. His eyes scanned the aisles, pausing briefly on Mei Lee behind the counter. He needed thread, a very specific shade of crimson to repair a tear in his wife's prized quilt. He barked his order at Mei Lee, his tone dismissive and impatient. Mei Lee, despite the tremor of anxiety that ran through her, met his gaze with quiet dignity. As she turned to retrieve the thread, a subtle thematic hint of the inevitable confrontation settled over the scene, the clash between the Old South and the burgeoning hope for a new era, echoing in the very air of the Five and Dime. The bell above the door jingled, announcing a story about to be told, a historical account about to be etched into the collective memory of Harmony, a story of defiance, courage, and the quiet revolution brewing in the heart of a young woman named Mei Lee. The thread, a vibrant crimson, lay waiting, a symbol of the ties that bound, and the threads that threatened to unravel. Harmony, Arkansas wasn't just a map dot, it was a living tapestry woven with the threads of generations. The air hung thick and heavy, scented with the sweet rot of ripening cotton and the acrid smoke from the mill that dominated the landscape and the lives of so many. The town square, ostensibly a place of community, was subtly divided, the unspoken lines of segregation etched as deeply as the cracks in the sun-baked pavement. The white clapboard church stood tall, a beacon of faith and a silent enforcer of social order. Across the tracks, the black community thrived despite the limitations imposed upon it, their resilience a testament to their spirit. Mei Lee's story began not in Harmony, but in the whispers of her ancestors. Her great-grandmother had been a slave, her grandmother a sharecropper, each generation fighting for scraps of dignity in a world determined to deny them. These historical accounts were not just stories, they were the foundation upon which Mei Lee built her dreams. She possessed an insatiable curiosity, devouring books in the library's colored section, her mind a sponge soaking up knowledge. Her motivation wasn't just personal ambition, it was a burning desire to uplift her community, to dismantle the systems that had oppressed her family for generations. Mr. Abernathy, the owner of the Five and Dime, was a study in contradictions. He had inherited the store from his father, a man who had staunchly upheld the traditions of the South. Abernathy, however, was different. He'd seen the world beyond Harmony, having served in the war, and the experience had broadened his perspective. He saw Mei Lee's potential, her intelligence, her unwavering work ethic. His initial motivation was pragmatic. She was a good employee, but over time a genuine respect and affection grew between them. He saw in her the future of Harmony, a future he secretly hoped for but feared might never come. Clarence Hamilton represented the entrenched power of the Old South. His family's cotton mill was the lifeblood of Harmony, but it also symbolized the exploitation and inequality that plagued the community. He viewed the world through a lens of privilege and entitlement, believing that his position in society was divinely ordained. His motivation was simple: to maintain the status quo, to preserve the power and wealth that had been passed down through generations. He saw Mei Li not as an individual, but as a symbol of the changing times, a threat to his way of life. The five and dime itself was a microcosm of harmony, a place where different worlds collided. The shelves were stocked with goods that catered to both white and black customers, but the unspoken rules of segregation still applied. The water fountain was labeled white and colored. The seating at the lunch counter was subtly divided. The store was a battleground of sorts, a place where the past and the future, prejudice and progress, were constantly vying for dominance. This environment, steeped in history and rife with social tension, set the stage for the inevitable clash between Mei Li and Clarence Hamilton, a clash that would forever alter the trajectory of Harmony, Arkansas. The store held history, the stories, and the accounts. Hamilton refuses Mei Li's service, unleashing hidden prejudices in Harmony. Abernathy's past, a secret act of defiance during the war, surfaces, complicating his stance. Mei Li discovers a hidden ledger detailing Hamilton's exploitative practices at the mill, igniting her resolve. Mei Li's primary goal became clear: expose Hamilton's exploitation and challenge the ingrained prejudice in Harmony. Her first obstacle was Hamilton himself, a man wielding immense power and influence. She decided to use the ledger she found to rally support within the black community and subtly influence the white townsfolk who felt morally conflicted by Hamilton's actions, but economically tied to the mill. Abernathy, torn between his desire to support Mei Li and his fear of economic ruin, found himself caught in a moral dilemma. His goal was to protect his business and his employees, but standing against Hamilton could cost him everything. A subplot emerged as Abernathy quietly began providing Mei Li with information about Hamilton's dealings, while publicly maintaining a neutral stance, a tightrope walk between conscience and survival. He used stories from the past to help him navigate the present. Hamilton, sensing the growing resistance, intensified his efforts to discredit Mei Li, using his influence to spread rumors and intimidate her supporters. He sought to maintain his control over the mill and the town, viewing Mei Li as a dangerous insurgent threatening the established order. His goal was simple: crush the rebellion before it gained momentum. A subplot involving Sarah, a white woman who worked at the mill alongside her black neighbors, developed. She witnessed firsthand the injustices Hamilton perpetrated, and the ledger confirmed her suspicions. Torn between loyalty to her community and her growing sense of moral outrage, Sarah became a reluctant ally to Mei Li, feeding her information and helping her navigate the complex social landscape of Harmony. Mei Li's efforts to organize a peaceful protest at the mill faced immediate resistance. Hamilton used his influence to pressure local authorities to deny permits and threaten to fire any employee who participated. This initial setback forced Mei Li to rethink her strategy, leading her to explore alternative ways to raise awareness and challenge Hamilton's power. She learned the power of stories, of accounts passed down through generations, and she vowed to write her own chapter in the history of Harmony. The dynamics between Mei Li, Abernathy, Hamilton, and Sarah became increasingly complex, their relationships shifting and evolving as the conflict intensified. Their goals, motivations, and the obstacles they faced were intertwined, creating a web of tension and suspense that would ultimately determine the fate of Harmony and its people, echoing accounts of similar struggles across the South. The inciting incident occurred on a sweltering Saturday afternoon at the Five and Dime. It wasn't a grand event, no explosion or dramatic confrontation, but a quiet, insidious act of defiance that rippled through Harmony like a stone dropped in still water. Mrs. Eleanor Abernathy, Mr. Abernathy's mother, a woman who represented the old guard of Harmony society, entered the store. Abernathy, a staunch supporter of segregation, had always been polite, if distant, to Mei Li. She adhered to the unspoken rules of the South, never explicitly rude, but always maintaining a clear social distance. On this day, however, she broke with tradition. She approached the counter where Mei Li was working and requested service. When Mei Li politely greeted her, Mrs. Abernathy looked her directly in the eye and stated, in a voice loud enough for everyone in the store to hear, that she refused to be served by colored help. She demanded that Mr. Abernathy himself wait on her. The request, delivered with a chilling composure, hung in the air, a stark declaration of prejudice that shattered the fragile peace of the Five and Dime. The immediate consequence was a palpable tension that gripped the store. Customers froze, conversations ceased, and all eyes turned to Mr. Abernathy, awaiting his response. Mei Li, though outwardly composed, felt a familiar sting of humiliation. She knew this moment would test everything. Mr. Abernathy's response was slow in coming. He looked at his mother, a woman he loved and respected, and then at Mei Li, an employee he had grown to admire. He knew his decision would have profound consequences for everyone involved. He remembered his accounts and his history. His motivation to act stemmed from a complex mix of factors. His growing sense of justice, his respect for Mei Li, and his realization that silence in the face of prejudice was complicity. After a moment of agonizing deliberation, he spoke, his voice firm and resolute. He politely informed his mother that Mei Li was the only cashier on duty and that if she wished to be served, Mei Li would be the one to assist her. Abernathy, her face flushed with anger, stormed out of the store, vowing never to return. The incident, though seemingly small, became a catalyst for change. It forced Mr. Abernathy to take a public stand against racism, it galvanized Mei Li's resolve, and it exposed the deep divisions within Harmony, setting the stage for the escalating conflict to come, fueling future stories. The departure of Mrs. Abernathy was a history book being rewritten in real time. The immediate aftermath of Mrs. Abernathy's outburst brought a mix of reactions. The white community, already simmering with racial tension, divided sharply. Some applauded Mrs. Abernathy's stance, seeing it as a defense of tradition, while others quietly disapproved, recognizing the injustice of her actions. The black community, however, rallied behind Mei Li, their support unwavering and vocal. Accounts of similar events in their past fueled their determination to stand strong. A new character, Reverend Elijah Johnson, a charismatic and influential leader in the black community, emerged as a key figure. He saw Mrs. Abernathy's actions as a direct assault on their dignity and a challenge to their hard-won progress. His goal became clear. Use this incident to galvanize the community, demand equal treatment, and challenge the systemic racism that permeated Harmony. Mr. Abernathy faced immediate repercussions. Mrs. Abernathy, true to her word, organized a boycott of the Five and Dime, urging her friends and social circle to take their business elsewhere. The store's profits plummeted, threatening its very survival. He now struggled more than ever to balance his conscience with his financial stability. Adding to the complexity, Clarence Hamilton saw an opportunity to exploit the situation. He approached Mr. Abernathy, offering a loan to keep the store afloat, but with a catch. Mr. Abernathy would have to publicly denounce Mei Li and apologize to Mrs. Abernathy. The offer, couched in friendly terms, was a thinly veiled threat, a reminder of Hamilton's power and influence. Mei Li, witnessing the pressure mounting on Mr. Abernathy, felt a surge of guilt. She considered quitting, believing that her presence was causing more harm than good. However, Reverend Johnson convinced her that quitting would be a victory for the racists and a betrayal of her community. He reminded her of their shared history, the stories of their ancestors who had fought for equality, and urged her to stand her ground. A subplot emerged involving a local newspaper reporter, Daniel Miller, who saw the story as an opportunity to expose the racial tensions in Harmony. He began investigating the incident, interviewing Mei Li, Mr. Abernathy, and other members of the community. His goal was to uncover the truth, regardless of the consequences, and to hold those responsible accountable. As Daniel Miller delved deeper into the story, he discovered a hidden connection between Mrs. Abernathy and Clarence Hamilton. They had a long-standing agreement to maintain the status quo in Harmony, using their influence and wealth to suppress any challenges to their authority. This revelation added a new layer of complexity to the conflict and further fueled Mei Li's determination to fight for justice, adding a new account to the town's history. These emerging dynamics, the consequences of Mrs. Abernathy's outburst, created a volatile situation in Harmony. The characters, each with their own motivations and goals, were now on a collision course, their actions shaping the future of the town and adding new chapters to its ever-evolving story. The Five and Dime boycott tightened, Abernathy teetering on the edge. Hamilton's loan, now dangled, a perilous agreement compromising Abernathy's morals and Mei Li's security. His predicament amplified, principle versus survival, a dilemma echoing historical accounts of past crises where one choice changed everything. This mirrored many a historical story. Reverend Johnson's defiance surged. Sit-ins defied Harmony's segregation. Hamilton, controlling local power, cracked down on black activists, arresting dissenters, intimidating supporters. The accounts of violence were well known. Violence loomed, a devastating confrontation akin to historical racial unrest, the stakes soaring, pressure intense. These accounts became local history. Daniel Miller's digging exposed Hamilton's mill worker exploitation, black and white, and his corrupt land grabs enriching himself while decimating the community. Truth-seeking pitted him directly against Hamilton, whose sway discredited Miller, suppressed his reporting. Miller's subplot meshed. Harmony's systemic corruption exposed, reflecting power abuses of yesterday, his dedication recalling historic journalists. Each discovery shaped the unfolding history. The accounts of those exploited gave fuel to his pen. Inspired by their bravery, Mei Li decided to take direct action. She began organizing secret meetings with the mill workers, both black and white, educating them about their rights and encouraging them to demand better working conditions. It was a dangerous move, one that could have dire consequences if discovered, but Mei Li was determined to fight for her community. Those with a voice helped those without or with a quiet voice. These accounts helped others to step up. Sarah, torn between her loyalty to her family and her growing commitment to justice, found herself increasingly drawn to Mei Li's cause. She began secretly providing Mei Li with information about Hamilton's activities at the mill, risking her job and her reputation to help expose his wrongdoing. With accounts shared, those who were hesitant joined in. The intertwined subplots created unexpected connections. For example, Abernathy learned of Hamilton's land deals through Miller's reporting, reinforcing the importance of Miller's work. The more that Hamilton tried to suppress the reporter, the more that Abernathy felt inclined to speak up. He remembered the accounts of those who had previously faced great danger and how those actions had impacted future generations. The tensions between the characters rose to a breaking point. Abernathy was at the point where he had to make a crucial choice about whether to support Mei Li or give in to Hamilton. With accounts of those who came before him, he felt inspired to act. Meanwhile, Hamilton was at war with many factions that would expose him and bring his corruption to light. The decisions that each character made next would shape the story of Harmony for years to come. Harmony hurtled toward its climax as a series of events reshaped its power structure. Daniel Miller, succeeding despite Hamilton, unleashed his exposé on mill exploitation and land corruption. The article became a catalyst, sparking outrage and forcing even Hamilton's most devout supporters to reconsider their loyalty. The memory of similar exposes emboldened those in Harmony to speak up now. The published accounts were their driving force. Abernathy, facing immense pressure and inspired by Mei Li, reached his tipping point. In public he refused Hamilton's loan, condemned his corruption and pledged unwavering support for Mei Li and the black community. This defiance, triggered by ancestral accounts and moral clarity, turned him from a cautious observer to a champion of justice. He anticipated a hard road, but acted due to conscience, with tales of past brave figures at the forefront. The publication and Abernathy's stance acted as a watershed moment, the accounts becoming legendary. The pressure on Hamilton intensified, threatening his long-held dominion. The people of Harmony felt emboldened, their stories previously untold now had the opportunity to be shared. A transformation was underway from a town fractured by fear, to a town united by truth. Sarah, watching Abernathy's transformation, finally decided to take her own stand as well. She bravely came forward with her personal testimony to the authorities to further build the accounts against Hamilton. Though she was fearful, the bravery of Mei Li gave her strength. The past atrocities must finally be righted. Reverend Johnson, having been the voice of reason and strength for the black community, recognized this was the time to press forward, as all of the accounts were lining up to be favorable. Though they would face adversity, they all decided to act now. History would tell their tale. The climax was fast approaching, but the future had yet to be written. Abernathy's denouncement acted as a green light for other hesitant voices. Mill workers, emboldened by the accounts surfacing and fearing retribution, secretly organized a strike. The whispers of discontent grew louder, foreshadowing a major disruption to Hamilton's operation. In response, Hamilton turned desperate, resorting to intimidation tactics. He threatened Abernathy with legal action, attempting to silence him and reclaim control. However, Abernathy, fortified by community support and his newfound courage, refused to back down, armed with the accounts of those who were previously suppressed. A minor confrontation occurred when Hamilton attempted to forcibly evict Mei Li from her home, claiming she was a troublemaker inciting rebellion. Reverend Johnson and members of the black community intervened, forming a protective barrier around Mei Li and preventing the eviction. This act of solidarity demonstrated the strength of the community's resolve and foreshadowed a larger showdown to come. A surprising alliance formed between Sarah and Daniel Miller. Sarah, armed with insider knowledge of Hamilton's operations, secretly provided Miller with documents that further exposed his wrongdoing. Their collaboration, born of a shared commitment to justice, created a powerful force working against Hamilton. Meanwhile, A minor plot resolution occurred when the local authorities, facing mounting public pressure, reluctantly agreed to investigate Hamilton's activities. This initial concession, though small, signaled a shift in the power dynamics and created a glimmer of hope for justice. The accounts being shared had begun to permeate their consciences. Subtle foreshadowing hinted at Hamilton's downfall. Whispers circulated about Hamilton's past, stories of shady deals and ruthless tactics that had been buried for years. The emergence of these hidden accounts suggested that Hamilton's carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. The accounts of the town would turn against him. However, a betrayal loomed as Mrs. Abernathy, despite her initial animosity towards Mei Lee, began to question her son's actions. She saw the toll the conflict was taking on him and secretly began to doubt Hamilton's motives. Her internal struggle foreshadowed a potential shift in allegiance that could have significant consequences, further rewriting the accounts of Harmony. These events, the minor confrontations, the surprising alliances, the foreshadowing and minor plot resolutions, all served to set the stage for the climax. The characters were now poised on the brink of a major showdown, their actions poised to determine the future of Harmony, as the accounts of its people transformed. The narrative's final threads snapped taut as Hamilton's empire teetered from the mill strike, triggering financial collapse and social expulsion. Desperation fueled his actions, contradicting accounts of his former command. He who was previously untouchable was now at risk. The town wondered how the accounts would be settled. Mei Lee's met her most severe test. Hamilton, identifying her as the rebellion's source, launched a smear campaign, fabricating theft and violence accusations. This assault aimed to ruin her standing, severing community ties, and forcing her to confront her deepest fears. Her test would be to maintain integrity amid blatant falsehoods. The accounts of her strength would be needed now. Abernathy's commitment met its trial. Hamilton threatened to expose a buried secret, destroying his relationships and reputation. He would have to decide to preserve and protect himself and those he loved or to keep fighting for what he thought to be true and right, echoing the accounts of those who came before him. His own story was on the line. Would the town's accounts honor or condemn him? These heightened obstacles raised the emotional charge. Mill workers' livelihood, Mei Lee's standing, Abernathy's past, each hung precariously. Each thread and each account were converging. The very identity of Harmony was at stake, with long-running accounts threatened. Was this story a positive or a negative for their legacy? Sarah's loyalties were pulled in two different directions. She valued the importance of a united community but also realized that there would never truly be unity until they eradicated the division of class and race. She also knew that if Hamilton was truly evil, as the accounts claimed, then she was protecting something that should instead be destroyed. The town itself started to crumble under the weight of greed, shame, deceit, and fear. The citizens found themselves in a place they could no longer recognize. With many historical accounts flashing before them, they knew their actions now would set the precedent for their future. The narrative threads converged at a town hall meeting, a public forum meant to address the growing unrest. Hamilton, desperate to regain control, used the meeting to amplify his smear campaign against Mei Lee, presenting falsified evidence of her supposed crimes. Accounts of his past manipulation tactics were now on full display. However, his efforts backfired. Sarah, defying her fears, bravely stepped forward, providing irrefutable evidence of Hamilton's exploitation and corruption. Her testimony, bolstered by documents she had secretly gathered, shattered Hamilton's carefully constructed facade. The accounts she shared became more powerful than his lies. Then Mrs. Abernathy, deeply conflicted but ultimately guided by her conscience, took the stand. She revealed Hamilton's long-standing scheme to manipulate the town's economy and suppress dissent, confirming Sarah's accusations and exposing the depth of his depravity. Her decision, a shocking betrayal to Hamilton, marked a complete transformation, shifting the weight of the accounts against him. Finally, Abernathy addressed the crowd, confessing his past silence and pledging his unwavering support for Mei Lee and the black community. His words, filled with remorse and determination, resonated deeply with the audience, inspiring others to speak out and demand justice. His transformation, a victory for those who had suffered in silence, was complete. Cornered and exposed, Hamilton lashed out, spewing racist vitriol and threatening violence. However, his words rang hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence against him. The accounts were all against him and history would not be kind. In that moment, Mei Lee rose, her voice filled with strength and compassion. She didn't condemn Hamilton but instead, called for unity and reconciliation. She urged the community to move forward, to heal the divisions that had plagued them for too long, and to build a more just and equitable future for all. The impact of her words was profound. The town, inspired by her courage and her vision, began to heal. Hamilton was arrested, his empire crumbled, and his influence vanished. Harmony, forever changed by the events that had transpired, embarked on a new chapter in its history. The climax saw the convergence of all subplots as well. With Hamilton no longer in power, the mill workers were able to unionize and negotiate for better wages and working conditions. Daniel Miller received national recognition for his reporting, and the local authorities were held accountable for their past inaction. What role will you play in ensuring accounts of justice prevail in your own community? Years etched new lines on Harmony, converting the once divided town into a symbol of unity. Inspired by her experiences and having played a vital role, Maylee realized her dream of fighting injustice as a lawyer, always recalling her small-town accounts. Unity, standing strong, and the human spirit fueled her. The town's monument was now her driving force. Abernathy, reborn in the community's gaze, reshaped the Five and Dime into an inclusive hub, now an elder and sharer of history. Diversity and justice became his lessons, and mentorship his new calling. Past stories became powerful memories and powerful lessons, his past accounts transformed. His history was now his legacy. He had rewritten his own narrative. Even Eleanor Abernathy sought atonement through community work and racial advocacy. Her conversion showcased that deeply rooted prejudices could be reversed, showing the accounts of change within oneself. As a final account, she asked that her story be shared, helping others to understand the value of change. Harmony's legend grew, a haven where ordinary individuals achieved extraordinary feats, compassion conquering hatred. The town square held a monument, Harmony, Triumph over Division. It was a physical reminder of the past, and the accounts it represented must never be repeated. The transformed town became a beacon, hinting at future ripples of change. A new generation, schooled in the town's painful history, prepared to lead, each account shaping their moral compass. Sarah, inspired by the events, pursued a career in social work, continuing to fight for the marginalized. Even though Hamilton had vanished, the town was not naive in thinking that racism and division were gone for good. They vowed to forever be vigilant, ready to take action, and never allow accounts of the past to be repeated. This story serves as a reminder that even the smallest of actions can create seismic changes. By acknowledging the past, celebrating diversity, and fighting for what is right, the world can move towards harmony. It also shows that it is never too late to rewrite your story and become someone who is dedicated to making the world better. The lessons of this historic account must be applied to modern times. What story will you share, and what changes will you make to make sure the next generation benefits from history?